All right, let's dive into a story of incredible ambition, amazing technology, and some seriously fierce rivalry. We're going to talk about how we, as a species, first figured out how to build into the clouds, and how that one idea completely reshaped our world.
So, to get us started, I've got a little riddle for you. What on earth could a tall horse possibly have to do with the famous skyline of New York City? It sounds kind of crazy, I know, but the answer is really the key to our entire story today.
And here it is. Believe it or not, the word skyscraper had nothing to do with buildings at first. Nope. Back in the 1780s, it was just slang for a really tall horse. Then it meant a tall sail on a ship or even a ridiculously tall hat. It took a whole century for buildings to get so tall that the name finally stuck to them. Pretty wild, right?
So what was the big deal? Why did we suddenly get this obsession with building up? Well, it all boiled down to a very simple, very human problem. We were just plain running out of room.
Think about it. In the decades right after the American Civil War, cities like New York and Chicago were absolute magnets. People and businesses were flooding in. On a tiny island like Manhattan, or in a booming hub like Chicago, every square foot of land became precious and incredibly expensive. There was literally nowhere left to build but up.
And just to give you an idea of how insane this growth was, look at Chicago. In 1830, it was a tiny settlement with about 50 people. Just 40 years later, it was a bustling city of almost 300,000. That kind of explosive pressure is what forces people to get creative and start thinking in a totally new direction.
But, just wanting to build tall isn't enough. You got to have the right tools for the job. A few absolutely essential inventions had to come together at just the right moment to make the skyscraper we know today even possible. There were really three key pieces to this puzzle. First, and this was the real game changer, the steel skeleton. The idea was that an internal metal frame, not the thick outer walls, would hold up the building. Second, you needed a way up. I mean, who wants to walk up 20 flights of stairs? The invention of the safe passenger elevator made those top floors valuable real estate. And finally, strong foundations. To hold up all that weight, you had to dig deep, using these clever watertight boxes called caissons to anchor the building right down to the solid bedrock. And here's the most important part. None of these things would have worked on their own. A steel frame is kind of useless without an elevator, and you can't build either without a solid foundation. It was the powerful combo of all three that really kicked off the revolution.
Okay, so we've got the motivation and we've got the toolkit. Now let's look at what happened when people actually started building. This wasn't just about architecture. It was about an epic competition between America's two fastest-growing cities.
And the first shot was fired in Chicago. Now I know, looking at it today, it might not seem like much, but the home insurance building was a complete game changer. At just 10 stories tall, it was the first to use that steel skeleton idea, and for that, it gets the title of the world's very first skyscraper. Chicago had officially started the race. And what's so cool is that this rivalry created two totally different styles, almost like two competing personalities. Chicago was all about practical, strong, box-like designs that were elegant in their simplicity. They called it the Chicago School. New York, on the other hand, had smaller plots of land, so they built these skinny, flamboyant towers, mashing up styles from all through history. They were definitely the show-offs of the two.
But then, a major plot twist. Just as Chicago was hitting its stride, the city got nervous. Worries about fires and crowded streets led them to pass a law in 1892 that capped building heights at 150 feet. And just like that, Chicago was out of the race. The torch was passed, and the future of building tall now belonged completely to New York.
And oh boy, did New York run with it. With its main rival on the sidelines, this city went into overdrive. This kicked off the golden age of the skyscraper, a wild 3-decade-long dash to build the tallest building on planet Earth. Just look at how fast this all happened. The record for the world's tallest building wasn't just broken, it was shattered over and over again. The title changed hands almost yearly. In just over 2 decades, the record height more than doubled, ending with the two most legendary skyscrapers of all time, the Chrysler and the Empire State Buildings, finished just as the Roaring '20s ended with a bang.
And these new giants weren't just tall, they were drop-dead gorgeous. This was the era of Art Deco, a style that was all about drama and glamour. Architects were designing these stunning, sculptural towers with rich colors and bold shapes that looked amazing against the sky.
But not everyone was a fan. As the buildings got taller and taller, the criticism got louder.
The writer Henry James really captured this mood when he called them mercenary monsters, basically giant cash registers with no soul.
The ambition seemed absolutely limitless, but the party couldn't last forever. In fact, a perfect storm was brewing that was about to bring this first, frantic race to the sky to a screeching halt.
There's a real irony in how it all came to an end. The very thing that made these buildings so spectacular
also became their biggest problem. And I mean that both literally and figuratively. The city was finally starting to feel the consequences of reaching so high.
So what happened? Well, it was a 1-2-3 punch. First, the public got fed up with giant buildings turning their streets into dark canyons. That led to a famous 1916 zoning law that forced new buildings to set back or get narrower as they went up. That's why so many New York skyscrapers have that classic wedding cake shape. And then came the knockout blow, the Great Depression. The 1929 crash completely wiped out the real estate market. The money and the ambition just dried up overnight.
So that first great skyscraper race was this incredible cycle of boom and bust, all driven by technology and money. And it leaves us with a pretty big question for today, doesn't it? A century later, what new forces, things like climate change, big data, or our culture, are shaping the giants that are now reaching for our sky?